Can an organization thrive simply by producing great products and solutions at the right price? Our guest today believes that they also need to transform markets in their favor by aligning their capabilities with long-term customer problems. In this way, the perennial challenge of performance versus growth and innovation moves from being an either-or dilemma to a both-and mindset and culture.
Hey folks, welcome back to the Evolving Leader Podcast. I'm Scott Allender.
And I'm John Gomes.
Hey my friend, how are you feeling today?
I am feeling a mixture of energy and hope. I've just come back from New York and I feel like I'm a little bit more connected with the world, having not really done much traveling for, like most people, for several years. And I'm also feeling quite a high degree of anxiety given what's happening in our economy, but ever optimistic. Net out positive. How are you feeling, Scott?
Well, I just came back from New York too. We weren't there at the same time, were we?
No.
I just got back last night.
No.
Oh, good. Because I would be offended if you didn't let me know. I'm feeling, now I'm not feeling offended, but I was for a moment. I'm feeling really positive, actually. Got to do a whole bunch of good work this week and just feeling really rewarded by that and really grateful. And excited to have this conversation with you and our guest today, because today we are joined by William Kilmer. William is an entrepreneur, a venture capital investor, and author who has helped found and invest in dozens of companies around the world over his 25-year career in the technology industry. He is the managing partner of C5 Capital, a specialist venture capital fund investing in cybersecurity, cloud infrastructure, applied data analytics, and space economy companies. He has been founder and CEO of several cybersecurity and data analytics companies, formed a wireless operator in the UK, and has served on the board of over 30 technology companies and other organizations. He's a presenter, a speaker, and the author of the recently released book, Transformative: How to Build a Game-Changing Strategy, Retool Your Organization, and Innovate to Win. William, welcome to the Evolving Leader.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
William, so how are you feeling today?
I'm actually feeling pretty upbeat. I love your introduction and the fact that you were asking each other how you were doing. I actually just came back, John, from a trip to London myself last week. So it was nice, likewise, to be out traveling once again and getting the chance to see a bit of the world.
Well, that's good to hear. We're all zigzagging in each other's paths. So let's start with your backstory. Can you give us a little bit of the journey that's got you to where you are today?
Yeah, absolutely. So I realized that when Scott was reading the introduction, it's a bit dated. I'm probably more closer to 30 years in the industry now rather than 25. But I've been a technology entrepreneur and a venture investor my entire career. Have worked in smaller companies and larger companies as well. Started by founding a company early on in my career that was acquired, and worked for a large company, Intel Corporation, for a number of years, where I learned sort of my leadership style. And then, after that time, was in the venture industry, founded a couple of startups in the data analytics and cybersecurity space. And most recently, just as an update, I actually am now an advisor with a new group called Gallos Technology, which is a UK-based platform focused on both investing in early stage companies as well as co-building, or what we look at as a foundry model of creating companies that we think have an opportunity in the market space where there's a gap. So, most of my background has really been around technology and leadership.
What attracted you to that field, and why? I hear the passion, and obviously you've got this rich portfolio. What was the starting point for you, and how did you come to get involved?
From my perspective, it's hard to find an industry where I felt like I could have more impact on people and the way that they live. And, from the very beginning, early in my career, it was around networking, right at the, sort of after the phase where the internet first started to become commercialized. Just this idea that we could connect people together, connect companies, help them to share information. There was just sort of a profound feeling that you're positively changing people's lives. And I think that's a passion that's kept me in it, since then.
Before we get a little bit into the deeper aspects of your work, can we just talk about innovation and the challenge that poses for most organizations? Because we're constantly hearing this tension between performance and growth. And it'd be really interesting to hear about your take on what it means to be successful in leading innovation in organizations. How do you actually do it? I know it's a big topic, but what are the 2 or 3 things that you've recurringly seen that create the difference between winning and losing in that field?
Well, I like to look at innovation as both an outcome, which I think the classic definition of innovation is that you've developed something that's not just new technology or a new product, but you've actually been able to commercialize it and bring it to market. But it's also a process, and I think as leaders, we have to look at both of those and identify both, what are we creating? Is it something that's unique? Is it beneficial? But also, how do we do it? And, are we comfortable with the processes that we have, or are we continually challenging those? One of the things that I bring up in my book is the fact that we are so focused on innovation today, and it really is especially now during an era of digital transformation, we're so focused on improving innovation and applying technology innovation to almost every sector of the market. Yet 94% of executives express disappointment or dissatisfaction in their innovation performance. No matter what we do, organizations think that they should be doing better. And I think that has a couple of implications, but one of the major ones to me is that we put so much emphasis on this idea of innovation and how we tie it to a product or features or something that is new, that we sort of lose the perspective of why are we innovating? And the reality is we're innovating to do something that is interesting, attractive, that will be beneficial or helpful to the people who are going to buy that product or service.
What do you think is the origin of that blind spot?
It's an interesting one because it's one that I've experienced throughout my whole career. And in fact, it's a bit of the impetus for the book. But, we've developed over this time something that I call something that has been noted in the market as the technology effect. And that technology effect is sort of, taken us to this idea that, that technology is the determinant as to what is the determinant of our success as an organization, that basically we are going to win or lose based on how good our technology is. And, I'm not sure what the origin is other than, when I look at the innovations that we've seen in the last, let's say 30 years, we've gone through this era now of the internet phase to, web applications or web 2.0, mobile technology. Now we're moving to the cloud. Now we're building all of these other technologies that are coming into place, and you could just think about everything that's coming or that is being enabled right now. Things like artificial intelligence, machine learning, virtual reality, and artificial reality, robotics, quantum computing. We look at all of those as technologies that we need to be able to incorporate or use somehow, and I think, because of that, because we base our factors of success on that technology and how good it is, we tend to look at that as sort of the end game. And that's this idea that, again, this technology effect, that what technology we have, what we have built, is what's going to make us successful. And I think, if you look at how it's been portrayed in the media, you certainly, see that from, everyone from, Steve Jobs to, you think about founders of Uber, like Travis Kalanick and others, that everything is oriented around how great of technology did they actually develop. And, that was really the pivot point of success for them.
I want to stay with this 94% dissatisfied statistic that execs are, very dissatisfied with their company's innovation performance, because that's really significant. In some of my observations and conversations we've had on the show before, part of the reason I think innovation doesn't seem to work in a lot of companies is it seems to sit on the side of what the core business is, as opposed to being baked into everything the organization does. Are you observing that? Do you think that's a factor in what's going on, or is there something entirely different happening?
Yeah, I think I think that the technology, again, is sort of taken center stage. And what hasn't taken center stage is what I highlight in the book, which is really a refocusing of organizations on what is the customer outcome? What are we trying to provide to them that is really of value? And maybe how do we change even, what they value? I think about, a recent, example in the market, which was, Yahoo and Yahoo's attempt to sort of bounce back in the market, in the sort of early to mid, 2010s, right? CEO Marissa Mayer came in from Google, and, she was really kind of highlighted as the person who was going to, come in on the white horse, be the white knight, and really change the company. And so much of the focus was in that organization at that time. Let's grab all of these pieces of technology and bring them into the company, because that's what they're missing. So, I think over that time, they spent, about $2 billion, acquired some 53 companies, and, bought into everything that they needed to have at that time, mobile technology, video, how to do advertising, a social media platform of their own. And, all of it was sort of accumulating this war chest of technology without really putting it together to say, what are we trying to, provide to our customers that's really going to change their lives in a significant way and help them?
What's the difference between innovation and transformation?
My experience as both a CEO, an investor, a board member for a lot of companies, we've been very, very focused on, we're going to innovate. We're going to create something new, something that's disruptive. And we've had that sort of product orientation. And, the number of times that I've been in board meetings or that I've seen an investor pitch, and it's all been focused on, here's what we're creating that's really interesting, really new. And that's really, what I look at as technology development or technology innovation. And the principle behind transformative really was a deep study on some of the most successful companies that we've seen over, the last 50, 60 years, because some of it goes back and incorporates, early companies, looking at things like Ford Motor Company, for example. And it really looks at what were the attributors of success that we can pinpoint and identify that they did that was different. And, transformation was really this idea that came out of it, which was most of these companies, unlike our present sort of frame of mind, which is that, companies that are truly successful are the innovators. They're the first to market. They're the ones that bring up something that's completely net new. Most of these companies actually went in and addressed problems that already existed in an existing market of some sort. And where they really came into play and became a significant factor, even an industry leader, is because they were able to transform that market. And it triggered first and foremost around that idea of a customer outcome. It was really deriving something new that still had a semblance of what the customer's original need was still fulfilling that, but was adding to that experience. And then from there are cascading effects around, building new capabilities in order to fulfill that really was counter leveraging against the existing industry or infrastructure, and really, attempting to change the way that the industry infrastructure exists, really innovating around that just to fulfill that capability and creating a mass market. So the result really became, these companies essentially were very, very good at finding new opportunities by changing the customer outcome, building upon that, and then scaling a new market, which ended up taking over, the old market. And a great example that I often use on this is Netflix. When you think about Netflix 1.0, now 20 years ago, was really oriented around, shipping DVDs to people's homes. and, giving them something that they could watch with this new technology of DVDs. And, we often think about that as well. That was the blockbuster killer. They essentially came up with a different model and avoided late fees and everything else. And the reality is it was much deeper than that. When Netflix came out, in some ways for the first year, they were actually competing head to head against Blockbuster, but without stores, even charging on a per movie basis. And then they finally understood what the customer needs were and how they could deliver something completely different. And they switched to this idea of a subscription model and building queues of DVDs that people would want to watch. And what came of it was you were no longer in this sort of frenzy that you wanted to see the latest movie, and so you were heading to your Blockbuster. Instead, what Netflix gave you was something completely different, which was an on-demand rental of a library of 50 or 60,000 DVDs or movies. And so your habits changed, what you consumed changed. You still were fulfilling the same basic need, which was, I want to watch something on a Friday night. But all of a sudden you had a much different outcome for you, which was you could select from a much more vast library. You had it on demand right in front of you. And you could start consuming content that was much different than maybe you watched when you went to the local Blockbuster. So, to me, that's really the essence around it, is figuring out how do you change that customer outcome in a way that is so significant that it's a different benefit for them, and it changes the way that the industry is structured in order to fulfill that.
I kind of miss going to Blockbuster on a Friday night, if I'm honest.
It's the candy. It was the candy up front, right? That you could grab on your way out.
I didn't miss having to take them back, though. That was one of the biggest source of arguments for people and their families. So, William, if we are thinking about, because you sit at this really interesting intersection between, sitting on the boards of organizations trying to do this stuff, investing in it, advising people. Let's imagine you're talking to a CEO who is sitting in an organization that isn't really being successful around transformation, isn't being successful around their innovation events, and then is looking at the next several years with this global instability. What advice would you give that person at a very high level in terms of how to frame and look at these challenges differently?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think, what I would normally offer to people is that what is helpful first is to start with sort of setting what I call your worldview, or the context of the world that you live in today. And so generally when I meet with a CEO and, they're wanting to look at, where should we go? Where should we, invest in innovating going forward? I say, well, really take time to sort of build your description of what world you're in today and what you see changing over time. And so, this idea of a worldview is really to just look at what are the factors today that are affecting you as an organization and your customer or your intended customer, and how are those potentially changing over time? And I really like this idea of using what's called a pestle analysis and looking at, what are the political, economic, social, technological, environmental, and legal sort of trends that are happening. And, identifying what are the things that may be different in the future, and how does that both enable opportunity and how does that change the needs of your customer? And I think once you do that, that allows you to sit down and say, well, where do we fit in all this? What are we providing, to our customer today, and where can we take them going forward? I have an example that I use oftentimes with a CEO that I worked with, who started to develop this practice around this. And first, what she did was sit down with her entire team, with her leadership team, and they basically mapped this out with this open question of, what is the world that we live in today? What's our worldview on what's happening? And they all came together, built it over a series of discussions, and then they looked at how does that impact the customer that we're going towards, and what can we do? That sort of is the third phase to affect that or improve dramatically, their benefits, or where can we take them? And then the last piece of it was really looking at what do we need to be as a company in order to be able to best fulfill that? What are the things that we have to focus on? What capabilities we need? But starting with that first view of what the worldview is really helps to level set everybody, so you have a common understanding, common background. And in fact, this CEO in particular would take those concepts, those four concepts, And she developed them into a set of slides that she would use all the time. So when she met with her management team, when she met with her board, she would remind them, these are the things that we've set. Here are the trends that we see that are happening that, we think are affecting us and our customers. Therefore, this is what, where we want to take them. And here's what we need as a company to change to become what capabilities we need in order to be able to best serve them. And it was sort of putting that out there every time to say, this is a reminder, but it's going to change over time. And, you're welcome to challenge, these assumptions that we're making. But I think just that process gets somebody towards this idea that they can deliver something that is better for their customers, something that's differentiated because it's providing them with a different outcome, based on what their changing needs are.
And in your experience, what kind of resistance does that create within senior leaders? What do they need to overcome to embrace that approach?
I think the number one thing is just inertia. It's really sort of, you have two loops as an organization. One is, how do you continue to do what you're doing better? And, the other is how do you innovate and create something new? And the inertia of that, that first factor that just sort of keeps you dropped into, we need to keep our heads down and focus on doing what we're doing better is really the biggest thing. So, a lot of that comes back to, building the right organization, the right culture that can be reflective, that, can take on these challenges, that is actively curious and really building something that is different. And I'll give you just one data point, around this. One of the things that was really interesting to me as I started to put together this book, Transformative, is I started to look into the backgrounds of all of the founders of these different companies. What was amazing to me was that 73%, so nearly 3/4 of those who founded these organizations, were what we would classically consider to be industry outsiders. They had no background in the market. They knew nothing about it, no experience whatsoever. And, that factor sort of applied to or contrasted to today, where we look at ourselves as organizational leaders, we try very much to sort of keep the norm, or normative practices inside of our organizations by hiring and promoting and incentivizing insiders. So, when we hire, we want to see industry experience. When we promote, we want to promote, or when we want new leaders, we want to promote from within with people who already understand what we're doing and just try to keep doing that better. When, the reality is most change that really happens comes from people having an outsider's perspective.
One of the many things that I found really interesting and what you talk about was this idea of a confidence bubble, where you talk about how enthusiasm around technological innovation often produces less innovative outcomes. Can you tell us about a confidence bubble that happens? What is that?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I think the confidence bubble really happens in several different factors. One is this idea, that we talked about of the technology effect, right? That we really focus in on technology as being sort of the prime indicators to whether or not we're going to be successful. And that really drives, our focus around, utilizing technology. And we become very, very confident in it. One of the statistics that I have in the book, and I'm trying to remember the exact numbers right now, but there was a survey that was done, not too long ago by Gartner, of CEOs, asking them, what do you think of yourselves? How would you rate yourself in terms of innovation? And interestingly enough, I think it was 41% of CEOs saw themselves as what they would call innovation pioneers. They were at the cutting edge of what they were doing. Another 37% found themselves to be, or identified themselves to be, fast followers, right? Those who quickly see that there's a technology innovation that's happening and then they adopt it. And, the result is that leaves like 22% of people that are, sort of laggards in the market. And it's like, we can't all be innovation pioneers. We can't all be fast followers. And there must be some, there's a disconnect there, I think, with what we perceive we're doing versus, what we're actually doing in terms of, real innovation. And I think what that blindness does, what that sort of self-confidence does around we're innovators is, number one, that sort of causes us to not step back and try to reimagine, new customer outcomes or better customer outcomes. We think more about what else can we do with our product? Our product's kind of already there. It's baked. We've got a few more features we can put into it, but we really, aren't going to do much more because we're focused on that rather than customer outcomes. The second is this area, that I call the innovation paradox. And that is because we're all rushing so quickly to do innovation, particularly nowadays as we're starting to incorporate, some key elements in of, machine learning and AI, really looking at data analytics, cloud, starting to develop software more in the cloud. And what's happening is we're sort of at this level where we're all, like, every company's wanting to do it. So we're all relying on the same consultants, the same strategy consultants, the same, system integrators, the same software repositories like GitHub. We're kind of borrowing code from the same sources. So while we think we're being super innovative, we're actually having to dip into sort of the same well in order to get our innovation technology up and running. And I think that sort of puts us in a paradox where everybody's sort of limited because we're all trying to do it. And I think that's a really big one. And I think the other is sort of the self-limitation that we fail to kind of look outside of the technology innovation itself as a way to innovate. And I'll just give a brief example. I spend a significant amount of my time in the cybersecurity industry. I work with startup companies, with larger enterprises and others that are buying cybersecurity, because it's an area that I've invested in for the last 15 years. And we did a study late last year, in December of last year, and we talked to a lot of what we call our chief information security officers. They're the main buyers of security and sort of the large enterprises. And we asked them, what do you want that's not out there today? What is interesting? And what was really interesting was so many of them came back to say, we're not that concerned about the technology. Technology is good, and we're getting, new innovative ways to stop these cyber attacks from happening. What we need are sort of new models. We keep getting technology thrown at us, and we need new ways to pay for it. We need new ways to manage it. We need people to manage it for us because there's a talent gap that's out there. And so there are all these different ways that companies could be thinking about, how do we innovate to give our customers a better outcome? But instead, what we're thinking is, how do we build new software and just, throw more software to them so that they can use it? And so there's a real disconnect there between what, innovators are building and what consumers are really wanting to buy.
I think that's really interesting, and that, when we're working with organizations on this front, you're right, there is a almost maniacal focus on the technology, what they don't have in terms of skills and partners and so on. And actually what's within their grasp a lot of the time is that they have the ability to imagine, reimagine, and generate new business models, which don't require a lot of those things. They might require different partners, different financing sources and so on. But why do you think that there isn't that kind of primary business model innovation going on at the same level as the technology?
My standard answer for this is that it's just hard. Innovating business models, I think, is difficult. And yet, when you look, especially when it's a challenge to what the organization is already doing or, how they make money. And so I think that's one of the bigger issues out there, is that it's a potential risk to their, the way that they do business. But, you look at where things have progressed, for example, in the software industry for the last, 10 or 12 years, really starting with, when Salesforce first came out with their product, and Mark Benioff, started the company, it was really orienting around this idea that, you were no longer going to pay for a license for software and then pay for, maintenance if you're a large company. Instead, you're going to buy a subscription to it. And it was one of the biggest revolutions in software. It lowered the barriers of entry. It made the market much more vast because people could buy, a product at a lower price that, they would continually pay rather than a big upfront cost. And we've sort of been on that model for, at least the last 15 years now, for most of our software. And that's been a huge innovation. But, everybody's now in that, and they're really focused on it. and it's hard to break out of that. And again, there are lots of, for example, software models where it would be more beneficial if you paid somebody to run that software for them. But because it's different, I think it concerns people to not, move into that space. But if you look at the flip side of it, most great innovation that we've seen today, I think, is always accompanied by a much different business model. Whether you go back to somebody as, sort of old school tech or old school as, somebody like Walmart, who really focused on technology innovation and, logistics in order to lower their costs and therefore be able to lower their prices, to, companies like Apple, who, sell hardware, but so much of what they do today is actually making money off of services side in terms of, the media that they sell, cloud services, etc. Almost every great innovation has really learned how to tie those two together of some sort of technology innovation or product innovation and business model innovation.
So Scott and I love sitting in on pitches and watching, startup teams, scale ups and corporate accelerators pitching. It's like magic sometimes, and it can be very frustrating as well. What's the last time you saw something that really, made the hairs on the back of your neck stand up in terms of a new opportunity? You thought, yeah, that could be transformative.
Oh boy, honestly, I think in terms of the potential, I feel like I see it almost every day. Yeah. I just sat on a pitch this morning, which I hope the CEO isn't on, so he doesn't know how exciting I found it. But just that they identified a challenge that is coming up in the market that they are going to intersect, that is both cost saving as well as providing more insight. The combination of those two, I think, was really exciting. Again, I think where things oftentimes fall down is when somebody says, okay, I've done this, that's really interesting, and now I'm just going to fall back into the model that everybody else has used in terms of every other part of my business. And that's maybe the disappointing point. I had a company that a couple of years ago now came with a really interesting and exciting product. What they were doing, it was so much better than what the existing market looked like. And while the market was a bit on the more mature side, they had something that was really unique. And then when I asked them about, what does it look like? How are you taking this to market? How are you, helping your customers to adopt this? What's the business model? It was sort of like the CEO just said, like I've seen the playbook out there. I know what everybody else is doing. I'm just going to do what they're doing, and I have a better product. And no matter how much I could, talk to him about, you've got to really look at these, other aspects of how are you going to transform the market? How are you going to shift things so that, your product is more interesting and that buyers start looking at the criteria of what you're providing as what they need? And how are you going to do that in a way that sort of prevents everybody else from just copying what you're doing? Kind of just, wasn't willing to look at it because he had such confidence in where he was going. And I think that's, the inhibitor. That goes back to that, technology effect that we talked about earlier, that everything is won or lost as based on how good our product is versus everyone else's.
And is there any emerging technologies that you think are underrepresented in terms of attention, that things that we might be missing here? Is there stuff out there that's going to suddenly shoot into prominence that's in that deceptive phase at the moment that you're seeing?
Yeah, it's interesting because I think we're very much at a time where, there are a lot of catalysts out there in terms of new technology that are going to impact us. I mentioned some of them earlier. Artificial intelligence and machine learning. I think many companies are just starting to figure out how to incorporate that. Robotics. I think quantum computing. I think that there are two that I really look at and I'm pretty excited about. One is this idea about virtual reality and augmented reality. And I think what we tend to think about today is that, virtual reality and augmented reality, that's all about metaverse or nothing. And, we look at particularly with where Meta, formerly known as Facebook, is today. And we sort of say, well, look, metaverse isn't happening. And therefore, these technologies aren't really, working or effective. And what I see as an undercurrent is that this idea of, virtual reality, and probably even more so augmented reality, is going to sort of creep into, everyday aspects of our lives that will be, I think, really effective. And I don't know when that's going to happen, but I think about augmented reality, and if you could use that, well, first of all, we're seeing it already today in some businesses. It's being used in training, for example, that I think is very helpful in business and government. Think about augmented reality and how you might use that even around your home, or, when you're in different locations, to have some sort of an overlay that is not the metaverse. It's not something that you have to go and be immersed into, but can enhance the world that's around us. I think that's an underrated capability, probably an underexploited one. The other one, which I think is interesting, and this is probably just because I'm a bit of a space nerd, but I look at all the things that are happening in the space industry right now, and I think we sort of set our mind around, space is all about exploration. It's about going to different places, and going to the moon, going to Mars, etc. And the reality is that so much is happening in space right now is sort of the space industry gets revitalized, which is really focused around augmenting what we're doing here on Earth, that I think that's going to be an exciting area. In fact, I wrote something just recently about how every company should be thinking about space today and having some sort of a strategy around it. And thinking in particular, when we're in space and we go from, I think right now there's something like 5,000 different satellites that are orbiting the Earth. That's going to go to something like 28,000 in the next few years. What does that look like when we have better access to sensors, when we have better photographic information, we have AI that can help to discern that and make better decisions? I mean, that's going to help so many different areas and so many different businesses to be able to enhance what they're providing to customers, that I think it's a really interesting area. You don't have to be a space company, but how can you use the data, the analytics, the information that's coming from that industry to enhance your business? And I think that will be one that 15 years from now, people will be surprised to say, wow, our lives are much better, or they've been enhanced because of what we've been able to see or learn, or coordinate from space.
It's really interesting.
If you're enjoying The Evolving Leader, please head over to Apple Podcasts and leave us a review. And don't forget to follow along on Instagram and LinkedIn. You can find us at Evolving Leader. Thank you for listening. Now, let's get back to the show.
Can you talk to us a little bit about how you have evolved as a leader? How you have developed and grown as an individual. So rather than the stuff that intellectually, how have you grown emotionally and in terms of self-knowledge over the years? What are the kind of key milestones for you that got you to the place you are today?
Yeah, I would say one of the things that has been really significant for me, again, especially in writing this book, was this perception about the outsiders and how the outsiders really change things while insiders, essentially reinforce. And, so I always say, if you want predictable success, then act like an insider. If you want, transformative sort of, orders of magnitude better success, you have to think like an outsider. And, while it sounds, it sounds maybe a bit discouraging that most of the real innovators have been outsiders. What I really take a lot of solace in, or I think a lot of encouragement in, is this idea that 27% of those that built these transformative companies were outsiders, but 73% were, but 27% were insiders. And I look at what they did and who they were, and I think that impacts me and how I think of things. And so if I look at those individuals, what you see is pretty common set of characteristics that I think have impacted me. They're highly curious individuals. They tend to be good students of their industry and their market, and they have sort of a framework which they have built, but also they're willing to challenge that often and deeply, and they encourage their team to do so as well. And, and they also, they've spent time outside of their industry. They have a broader network where they, work with individuals that can help sort of enlighten them. And so it really comes down to, this idea of, it's important to be curious. It's important to be able to challenge your own beliefs. It's important to have a sense of diversity and inclusion. And, those are words that, I think are hot buttons today. But the reality is I've looked at, companies, and I've looked at, where they have been successful, or the companies that have been successful at implementing, programs around diversity and inclusion. They are more successful. Mm-hmm. They are companies that, have been proven by research, do better. They're more innovative. Mm-hmm. They are financially more successful. And so, just this idea of opening up to broader opinions, being willing to challenge your own ideas, being curious, those have really been, I think, guiding factors in my own leadership style over the last few years.
Are these the types of organizations you would describe as challenge-setting organizations?
They are, absolutely. And I appreciate you bringing that up, Scott. One of the things that I cover in the book in particular is this idea. This is my last chapter, is the idea that people can set, they can create inside of their own organization what I call a challenge-setting, organization. This idea that, if they set their beliefs, if they create this worldview, that is the platform for them to be able to then challenge it, mm-hmm. and to constantly be looking at, does what we believe actually change, and how is that impacting our organization, and really being willing to even challenge your own biases and be willing to adjust your worldview. And then once you've gotten there and you've oriented yourself around that, what are the 3 to 5 challenges that you have in front of you that you just absolutely need to go focus on and act on, and how do you adjust for that? So one of the quotes I use in the book is from one of my personal heroes, Andy Grove, who was the former CEO of Intel Corporation, and he talks about the art of management is really in looking at all of the different things that you could be doing that comparatively look equal, and out of that finding the 2 or 3 or 4 things that will have the biggest impact for the effort that you're putting in. Mm-hmm. And I think that's, the essence of really being a challenge setting organization, is saying what's most important out of all these things that we need to focus on in order to be able to address today's or future challenges.
And yet so many leaders, not only do they not challenge themselves or their ideas or the ways of working, but they spend far too much time defending it, right? They want to defend what they've built as opposed to challenging. What's the mindset required for somebody who may be prone to defending ideas as opposed to challenging their own ideas? What has to happen there? What's the right mindset?
In my opinion, I think you have to have a modicum of humility, right, and curiosity that you regularly inject into things, and an ability to change, mm-hmm. And adapt. So a lot of that really just comes down to being curious, being observant, recognizing that you should be challenging your own thoughts. And there's so much going against this, right? I mean, we filter information today. We tend to lean towards confirmation bias. Mm-hmm. We have an anchoring cognitive bias that the first information comes in is the information that's right. And so it really just takes that humility and that willingness to step back and challenge ourselves that I think gets us there.
Yeah, I love it. John and I preach curiosity all the time. So thank you for sharing that.
So if we fast forward to 3 years, something like that, and I'm not asking you to make predictions, but I'm asking you to kind of think about positive, imaginative scenarios that organizations could be holding up and going, could this be a possibility for us? What are the kind of things that we should be looking at in terms of combining new technologies and business models to solve some of these big challenges facing organizations? What are the kind of things that you can inspire us with to think about?
So John, that I'm hesitant to predict the future.
Yeah.
But I think there's probably 3 things that I've looked at that are good indicators based off of history as to where we can apply a lot of this to. And that is, as we come back to that idea of changing the customer outcome, changing what it is, the benefits that they are accruing in a way that changes their criteria. I always look at 3 things, and I think if you think about some of the technologies that are available, you think about some of the maybe forcing functions about what's happening in the market today, and we're seeing great societal changes. I think we're coming into new generations that are a bit different. I mean, I'm a Gen Xer, and I've had different priorities and values than what I see my kids have, for example. Changes in economics, I think we've changed not only a view of the economies themselves, but a sense of ownership or what should be owned. And I think all of those things are definitely having an impact. But I come back to three things that people can focus on, that I think if they can apply whatever it is that they're doing, apply these to that, it would be helpful. And that is one, this is a sense of how do we create something that is better for our customers. One is this idea that we're always looking to increase convenience for our end consumers, for our customers. How do we make things easier for them overall? Two is this idea of reducing friction. I think that is in the world that we live in today, the ability to reduce friction, to be able to take out that that factor that is driving inertia between them and a product, and always be looking at, as the next wave, how do we make this available to more people, and reduce that whatever that barrier is. And then the third is this idea, I think especially today, of and I know this is a bit trite, but this idea of mass personalization. The explosion of data that we have today, there's all sorts of warnings I could give as a cybersecurity professional about that, but this idea that the more that we know about what individuals' needs are, the faster we're able to compute that with quantum computing, with artificial intelligence, machine learning, the better we are able to provide something that is specific to somebody's needs. That may be even in the world that we're living in today, figuring out how to curate content in a positive way. I think those ideas of increasing convenience, reducing friction, and personalization, they're going to continue to carry us a long way in terms of how we improve things for customers, how we become more transformative as organizations.
With our time left, what haven't we asked you that we should be asking you?
I think from my perspective, it really comes down to how do we implement some of these principles. And, one of the things that is really a significant portion of my book in particular, a third of it, the third section of the book, is really focused around, what I call retooling your organization for success. And it's just this idea that, you need to bring your team along. You need to be able to incorporate the power of the organization that you have. And that, really starts with this idea of first, defining a path towards differentiation. Putting yourself in a perspective where you've given a vision to your organization and you've also enabled them to be part of that and to contribute. The second part is this idea that, you want to build a culture that supports and sustains your strategy and, in fact, supports the adaptation of your strategy over time. And then that third element that we talked about, which is building a challenge-setting organization. From my perspective, the most difficult thing that leaders, the most difficult challenge that leaders have is how they translate the vision of what they're doing in a way that enables people, that invites inclusion and contribution to that, and that enables your organization to recognize, when change is needed. And so those elements of really, defining that path and that intention of where you're going, having the right culture in place, and then, continually coming back and re-inspecting it and making adjustments, is sort of that critical element on the ground that helps leaders understand how to implement, what they're trying to do.
Brilliant. William, thank you for taking time today, and we are better for it. So thank you for your insights.
Thank you, William. Been really interesting.
Thank you both. I really enjoyed it.
And folks, before you do anything else today, make sure you get online and order your copy of Transformative by William Kilmer. And until next time, remember, the world is evolving. Are you?